The Great Flood, Part 2, Sentence 3. Tum Jupiter flumina convocavit, quibus ubi convenerunt, ita dixit, vos portas vestras aperire et super terram aquas vestras mittere volo. Sentence 2 is very much longer than sentence 3. As I read, I noticed several things that will make translating this sentence more convenient. First of all, I noticed that it contains multiple verbs. The first verb is convocavit, from the verb convoco, convocare, convocavi, convocatum. The V of the third principal part I notice in the verb that is in sentence 3. This means that convocavit is built on the base of the third principal part, and the ending it tells us what tense it is written in. I also notice that immediately following convocavit, I have a relative pronoun. Relative pronouns always indicate that a clause, a new clause, is beginning. Typically, a relative clause will end where we have the first verb. The first verb after quibus is convenerunt. However, I am not going to end my relative clause here because of the commas that surround ubi convenerunt. Ubi, which means where, can also serve as a conjunction. And so the words ubi convenerunt are actually their own clause hidden inside a relative clause. If I now go back to quibus, my relative pronoun, to search for the next verb, I see that it is dixit, followed immediately by a semicolon and a set of quotation marks. So I know that dixit is the end of the relative clause. This leaves me with the remaining part of the sentence, which contains the verb aperire, mittere, and volo. Aperire and mittere, you should notice, both end with re. Aperire has ire at the end, and mittere ends with ere. This indicates that they are infinitives. As a result, they are not the main verb in this sentence, but are used to help complete the idea of the main verb, which is volo, all the way at the end of the sentence. We will discuss the specific construction of this third clause in just a moment. For now, let's go back and look at clause 1, tum Jupiter flumina convocavit. I notice right away that Jupiter is in the nominative case, which means it serves as the subject of the verb convocavit. So convocavit will be the second word that I use in my translation. Jupiter convocavit, and then we have the word flumina. Now flumina does end with the letter A, but if you look at flumen on the vocabulary list, you will notice that it belongs to third declension and it is neuter. When you have a neuter noun ending with the letter A, it is plural and in either the nominative or the accusative form. I already have a nominative subject, so that makes flumina accusative and the direct object of this first clause. So when we translate it, we will translate it with this word order: tum Jupiter convocavit flumina. Now, on to the second clause, which is our relative clause. It begins with quibus. Remember that the relative pronoun has an antecedent which must have the same gender and number as the relative pronoun. Quibus can be any gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter. So we need to look for the number of an antecedent that will match the number of the relative pronoun. Quibus is plural. The only noun in front of quibus that is plural is flumina. Therefore, quibus must refer to flumina. The other challenge with quibus is to determine if it is in the dative case or the ablative case. I'm not quite prepared to make that decision because I don't feel I have enough information. Quibus, as the dative, could be translated as to or for whom, and as the ablative, it could be translated as by, with, or from whom, even though there isn't a preposition in front of it. But I don't know enough about the remaining thought of the clause in order to determine how to translate it. In order to make that determination, it is best to find the verb. Here's why. If a verb has something to do with giving, showing, or telling, it almost always requires an indirect object, which is in the dative case, to or for whom. If it is not give, show, or tell, then I have to determine if the verb that's in my sentence needs an adverb to express how the action was completed, an ablative of means or instrument, which would call for an ablative case noun or pronoun without a preposition. So when we find the verb in the second clause, we want to ask ourselves, is it an action that the rivers were used to complete? In which case I will translate quibus as by, with, or from whom. Or is it an action that requires an indirect object? The verb in the relative clause is dixit, from the Latin verb dico, dicere, dixi, dictum, meaning to say or to speak. Aha, to say, to speak, has to do with telling. So this verb is going to require an indirect object, which makes quibus in the dative case, to or for whom. A quick word about dixit before we move on. Notice that it has an X in it. X is indicative of a third principal part. And if you look at the verb on the vocabulary list, dico, dicere, dixi, dictum, you clearly see the third principal part has the letter X. Notice that dixit ends with a T. Its subject is not in its clause. Instead, its subject is the singular noun Jupiter from the first clause. So when we translate dixit, we're going to have to make he its subject. The little clause inside the relative, ubi convenerunt, has a conjunction ubi, which will translate as when, and then the verb convenerunt. It ends with the letters nt. there is nothing in its clause to serve as the subject, so I have to look for an antecedent that can be a they to understand what the ubi convenerunt is talking about. Well, the only thing plural so far in this sentence are the rivers, flumina. So convenerunt is in fact referring to the rivers when they convened. So to translate the relative clause, I would start with quibus, to whom, and then I would put in the interruptive idea, ubi convenerunt, when they convened, ita dixit, or dixit ita. And remember that the ita is sort of replacing the colon, which we use in English to introduce a quote. Volo is the main verb of this clause, and the reason I go to it first is because it ends with the letter O, making the subject I. There's a footnote about it, so let's go down and look at it. We are supposed to translate it as I want. Now when you use the verb I want, you either want an object or you want to do something. That's the reason for our infinitives. I want, and then we go to the first infinitive, aperire. But do I use the words that come in front of it or the words that come after it as the direct object of aperire? Well, now it becomes like any other sentence. The et shows us that we have two parts. Vos portas vestras aperire, et super terram aquas vestras mitera. Pardon me. I'm having trouble saying that word. So begin with I want, and then finish the thought in two ways. What do I want? I want aperire portas vestras. I want, but then I've got this vos, which means you. He's talking to, and it's plural. So he's speaking to the rivers. I want you, rivers, to do what? To open portas vestras, your gates. So that's interesting because the first accusative case pronoun in this clause is serving as the direct object of volo. I want you. And then I want you to do something, to open your gates. I also want you to do something else. I want you to mitera vestras aquas. Where? Super terram. That's sentence 3.